and it's right at the 10 o'clock hour. So I want to just go ahead and dive in because we've got a lot of terrain to cover this morning. And so just a couple of notes this morning. If you will go ahead and put yourself on mute if you are not speaking, what that will do is cut down on background noise and feedback so we can hear from Dr. Leonard this morning. I'm going to be interviewing him, so I'm realizing my dreams of being a podcast host this morning. This is kind of fun for me. And then the other thing that I would maybe suggest this morning is if you go up in your right hand corner, you can go to view and then go to speaker view. That's going to let you see Michael as he talks a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic this morning and the information he has to share as opposed to the gallery view. So with those two things noted, good morning, I'm Anna Dixon, and this is a formation hour that is continuing our series about the great ends of the church. And today we're talking about the shelter, nurture, and spiritual fellowship of the children of God, which is a big topic. And we have lived through a year where all of that has been kind of upended, and we've started to think about how to do those things in totally different ways this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it felt like an appropriate time to talk about the pandemic and how we can take care not only of ourselves, but of our neighbors during this time. And so without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dr. Michael Leonard, who is a member of our church. He is a professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Atrium Health and the Assistant Specialty Director for Infectious Diseases. A lot of you know him. He is a graduate of Country Day, of Hampton-Sydney College and East Carolina University School of Medicine. He completed an internal medicine residency at Vanderbilt University and infectious disease fellowship at Emory University. After that fellowship, he joined the infectious disease faculty at Emory and served as the Georgia Division of Public Health TB Medical Director before he moved to Charlotte in 2010 to join ID Consultants. Dr. Leonard serves as the primary investigator for the Atrium Health HIV and Ryan White HIV treatment grant, and he is also the Director of Education for the Division of Infectious Diseases. His clinical and research interests have primarily focused on TB and HIV with an emphasis on access to care issues. And during COVID-19, he has served on the Atrium Health COVID-19 Treatment Working Group. Michael is also an ordained deacon in the Presbyterian Church USA. He and his family joined our church in 2012, and he also serves on the Global Mission Committee. He's married to Anitha, who is a pediatrician at Atrium, and he is also the proud father of Jacob, who's a freshman at the University of South Carolina, and Leela, who is in 9th grade at Country Day. And so we're glad to welcome him. We're going to spend the first half of our time talking to him about COVID, and then about halfway through, we're going to pause and hear from Don and Schmidt.
Not this time. I stayed up last night working with it, and I finally called them, and they have
as care practitioners, as doctors in the midst of the pandemic. And so we're going to get a couple of perspectives, and if you can hang on to the end, we'll open it up for questions. So with that grounding, let me say thank you so much for being here this morning, Michael. And let me just start by asking a very basic, not basic, but a general question, and wonder if you could just give us a grounding snapshot of where we are. We're more than 10 months into this thing. And so in some ways, you know, we feel like this is our new normal. And then we hear phrases like significant community spread. We also hear encouraging news about vaccines rolling out. And so it's this big mix of messages, and people like me who are, news junkies take it all in and need a little help kind of parsing it. So I wonder if you could just kind of catch us up where we are in Mecklenburg County.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me thank Anna for coordinating this and asking me to do this. A year ago, this would have made no sense at all to think that we were having a Sunday school discussion about COVID, but obviously a lot has changed in the past year. But I do thank Anna for asking me to do this. But absolutely, I would like to do whatever I can to help educate members of our church and help clear up some issues and help provide some overall education. So where are we right now? And almost every time I'm asked anything about COVID or the pandemic, it's almost always safe to start off by saying, I don't know. And that's not a cop out, that's the honest truth. Because as we have seen, what we know one day may not be true the following day. And I think that has been very frustrating to a lot of people. I know it has to me as a physician in getting different guidance and et cetera. But we also, when we look at the numbers, right now, as of today, we are doing a little bit better than we were a couple of weeks ago. Meaning we know we had because of Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, we anticipated that would create a rise in cases, and it did. And there are some indications that things are getting better right now when we monitor things like number of new tests, number of people who test positive daily. Then we have some other hospital data that helps look at the big picture, like number of hospital admissions, number of people in the hospital that are in the ICU, and things like that. And if you look over the past couple of weeks, there are some encouraging trends locally and nationally. But I always caution everyone, though, not to let our guard down when we see a positive trend, first of all, because when we look at the past year, so far we've had 3 peaks of this disease. We had a peak of the disease in the early spring in parts of the country. Then we had a summer peak, and now we've just had a winter peak. So I don't mean to be negative about this, but I'm always very cautious when we say, oh, well, the numbers are decreasing, we're in a good place. Well, it is definitely encouraging that the numbers are decreasing right now, but we just have to be careful to not extrapolate that too far in advance, at least for what we know right now.
A question about transmission of the virus. In the beginning, we were wiping down groceries and all of our surfaces, and we were told not to wear masks. And we've learned a lot over the last 10 months about how the virus is transmitted and how to change our behavior. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about that, about best practices for taking care of ourselves apart from the vaccine, those behavioral things that most of us are doing.
Right. So you're very correct, Anna. There was a time when there was guidance being given that if you bring home your groceries from the grocery store, you should wipe packages down, or if you want to avoid the grocery store and do online ordering, that I've seen lots of pictures of people wiping everything down. That just honestly wouldn't happen in our house. We're not that organized and usually don't have enough time to do that. So that was never an issue for us. But those were behaviors that early on we thought would help. Some of this has kind of leveled out somewhat in terms of leveling the knowledge base, I think. And you are correct. There were some recommendations very early on, that we not wear masks, that you really only needed masks if you were in healthcare settings. Now, part of that, well, there's really 2 parts to that. One part was there was not really good data for what wearing masks in the community would do. So we really didn't have the data that showed, because, like, for example, during influenza seasons, we've never in the US never recommended to wear masks on a widespread basis because we just didn't think it really made that much of an effect. So there were 2 issues that drove that early mask recommendation. One is that we didn't have the data. And number 2, we also didn't have the supply. And some of that recommendation was being driven by the need to protect healthcare workers and to make sure that we had an adequate supply in healthcare facilities. Now, thankfully, production did increase. There were other ways of getting masks made. And we later found, I mean, as this went on, we have found that wearing masks really helps. That's really probably mask and social distancing up until now were the two most powerful tools we had. And like I said, we didn't know that masks really were going to make that big of a difference. But I could show lots of data from a table that I have and a graph that I've seen where the combination of wearing mask and wearing mask, not just individually, but wearing mask as a community, that wearing mask and social distancing does play a huge role in this. The other issue is, you mentioned, wiping things down. Wiping things down does help to some extent. I don't think that we need to, wipe down everything that we bring home from the grocery store. But I'm always very encouraged when I go to Harris Teeter and I see someone outside wiping down the carts, because that's that's a very high yield place. Putting your hand on the grocery cart handle and things like that. So we know that those things do help because we know the virus does live in the environment. We know it can live on some surfaces. What surfaces and how long is kind of all over the board, but there is some, wiping down things that you're touching that other people are touching, using hand gel, all of that does help. And we know that a lot of respiratory viruses are actually spread just as much by touch as they are by what's in the air. So wiping, hand sanitizer for your hands is important. Wearing masks and social distancing, though, are the two key cornerstones to this, but definitely we need to use hand gel for sure.
Thank you. I know people are really interested to talk about the vaccine. That's the big news, and so I want to spend the bulk of time talking about that and answering some questions that I know are on people's minds. And so let me put it kind of in two buckets. One, asking questions that are more about the individual, and then collective questions. So we're really encouraged around here that people in our own community and in our congregation are starting to get, and have some people on the call, I see some faces, have gotten at least their first shot. And so we're beginning to see at least a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, even though we know that we're still months away, a ways away. And so many of us have read, that after getting a vaccine, we may still need to do things like wearing masks and social distancing for a while. Can you help us understand why we still need those behavioral tools in our tool belt, so to speak, to maximize the vaccine's effectiveness? That's different than, most of us who get a flu shot and then feel like, okay, check it off. So could you talk a little bit about that?
And let me just make a plug real quick about flu shots before I transition into the COVID vaccine issue. Hopefully everyone on this call has already had their flu shot. We are in a very unusual place right now because we have seen virtually no flu. And there's a lot of discussion as to why we've seen no flu. Is it that the people wearing masks and the social distancing has really helped for the flu? Now, granted, you can make an argument that it hasn't stopped the spread of COVID, but there may be some different dynamics in the transmission. But I personally have not seen a single case of the flu. My wife, I don't think, has seen a single case of the flu this year. But still, flu shots are important as well. So the vaccine issue is absolutely the I think the high water mark of all of this. First of all, I had anticipated that it would be well into 2021 before we would get it. And I think that how quickly that happened does cause some people concern, but it shouldn't though. And I can address that more specifically if anyone would like. But having the vaccine is what we've been waiting for. It's what we know is going to take us to the next level in terms of stopping this pandemic. You're absolutely right, Anna. For right now, though, we are still recommending wearing a mask. We're still recommending social distancing. We're still recommending using hand gel when you're out in public and touching surfaces that other people have touched. All those things are still important because no vaccine is 100% effective. And until we can get more of the community vaccinated, we're not going to be able to let our guard down completely, because vaccines have a two-pronged purpose. Vaccines help the individual and vaccines help the broader community. Vaccine offers you protection, you as an individual, it offers you protection. But once we can reach a critical mass of people vaccinated and having had COVID, creating natural immunity, then we move into what's called herd immunity. And herd immunity is different than individual immunity. Herd immunity is when literally the community is immune to a disease. And some examples of that are polio, smallpox, diseases that you may have heard of, but we don't see them anymore. And the reason is we eventually reached enough people with vaccination that those diseases don't exist anymore. Now, COVID might throw us some curveballs because we honestly, at this point, we do not know if we're going to need boosters in the future, or we don't know if there's going to be like getting a yearly COVID shot. That's actually a part of the piece of the puzzle that's missing right now, that we don't know what's going to happen further down the road. But right now, what we're concentrating on is making sure that everyone eligible gets their two doses. But right, I mean, if this will be a yearly thing or so, we don't know the answer to that yet.
Most people I'm talking to right now are really anxious to get the vaccine, but there are also people in our community who are kind of wary about how quickly it came to market. And I wonder if you mentioned you could talk a little bit about that, about the timeline and why. I wonder if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, no, and that's when we look at vaccine hesitancy, there are multiple parts of this that make people hesitant to get the vaccine. And one of the points that is sometimes raised is, okay, this happened too quickly. I don't trust it. I'm scared. This doesn't seem right. We have other disease processes that we've been waiting years for and don't have a vaccine, i.e. HIV, something that I deal with every day. And there's been a whole lot of effort for HIV and that we don't have a vaccine yet. But some things happened with COVID that made it a perfect storm. I think that because it was a global pandemic and there was enough global pressure, I mean, we weren't dealing with the disease isolated to one part of the world. This truly was a global pandemic that we haven't seen anything like it since 1918. And there was enough global pressure that forced the companies to essentially stop what they were doing and put all their resources into this. So I think that shows that sometimes the process is way too slow and drags on way too long. When if you dedicate your resources, you can get it accomplished. And honestly, one thing in the US that has made it available much quicker is we relaxed some of our FDA regulations. So essentially we cut some of the red tape. And we did that without sacrificing safety. We had enough safety data that everyone in the scientific community felt comfortable rolling it out, that we had enough data to say that this is safe, it doesn't harm people, and we had enough data to show that it already had, that showed protection. So essentially, we shortened the timeline needed for vaccines, and hopefully what that's going to happen, what that's going to produce is that down the road, as we have other vaccines in development, that will show that with this timeline that we can move quicker than we have historically. And also in that same light though, I don't want anyone to think that once a vaccine is out, that it stopped being, quote, monitored, okay? Any significant reaction that exists is still reported. There's still a body collecting data to make sure that we don't start seeing all of a sudden that we start seeing that people have one certain type of reaction or something. So that data will continue to be collected. But so far it's been given, I did not look at the dashboard and see how many doses, but we've given a lot of the vaccine already. And with only a few like allergic reactions that are significant, which can happen with anything you inject into someone, but there's definitely nothing above and beyond what we would expect.
I have two other questions about vaccines in the next kind of 8 minutes. One is about the new strain, and then one is about kind of getting back to normal or being able to move forward. So the quick answer question is, do you know anything about the vaccine's efficacy with these new strains that we're reading about, and whether or not it covers them?
And that's a great question, and that goes actually back to your first question when I started off by saying I don't know, and that what we know one day doesn't hold true the next day, because that is right. Anyone who's watched the news knows that there are some new strains that have been identified. And we don't know, they may have been around for a while during this, but that's not surveillance that really goes on all the time. But there's, I think, 3 strains that I'm aware of. There's a UK strain, a South Africa strain, and there's one more that I'm blanking on. And it does look like that these kind of one-off strains probably are a little more infectious, and I think the UK strain has even been shown to cause more complicated disease. So that's why, also going back to, I'm always hesitant to say that cases are decreasing and things are getting better, because we just need to not act too quickly because of something like this. So, but we also have no reason to think that the vaccine doesn't work against these strains. Immunologically, they're so similar that the vaccine should still protect us. So, yes, there are some concerns that if this strain is introduced into the community, that it could possibly cause a rise in cases, could make people sicker who get that particular strain, but the vaccine should work though.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure, I may have missed the second part of your question.
No, that was it.
Okay.
That was it. This is the crystal ball question, and I know that you don't have one. I wish that you did. We all wish that we did. But understanding that you don't have a crystal ball, do you have any, do you have any improved sense of a timeline for when we think things might begin to return back to some sense of normal? Or to put it another way, once people begin to get vaccinated, when can we begin to have our worlds open up a little bit, and what behaviors begin to be safe. And I'm thinking about, every institution's trying to make change. I'm trying not to put you on the hot seat in front of all these church people about when can we come back to church, and when can we go to restaurants, and when can schools open, and all that. But all of us are, I think, thinking those questions and asking those questions. I'm not asking you to predict a date, but I just wonder about kind of general timelines. Are we at a point where we're beginning to see when the world might be opening up a little more with the vaccine?
And I wish I could say when. I mean, obviously, we all want to get back to church. We all want to be able to go out to eat. We all want to be able to travel. I don't know what the right answer is, because having the vaccine is definitely a glimmer of hope. It's a glimmer of hope that 6 months ago we didn't have. But we are actually pretty early in vaccinating people. There's, we have a lot of people we need to reach. I'm very fortunate and thankful that I got mine on December 22nd. And that when this is all over with and done, and I'm reflecting on this many years later, that date will always stick in my mind, because that was the first time. And it's kind of cliche, in a way. Everybody posts their vaccine pictures when they get it. And, and I got mine several days into the cycle after all my friends had already gotten theirs, and I was late because of a technical glitch. But anyway, when I think back on all of this, that was the most emotional moment since this started. And that really, it was so bizarre. I drove over there not really thinking much about it. And as soon as I pulled in and I saw the sign for vaccination site to where to go, I kind of lost it in the parking lot, because for the first time, and I know this may be corny and cliche, but for the first time since last January, when we heard about COVID, I literally felt like, okay, there's actually a sense of hope here. Yeah. And that is really what I think is going to make the difference. What we're dealing with right now, though, is getting that vaccine to the right people. And I will make a plug: if you come out to the Atrium vaccination site next weekend, and Ethan and I will both be vaccinating people at the Panther Stadium. So, we are trying to reach people. We have some, and I know, as Anna alluded to earlier, unfortunately, there are some people that are hesitant about the vaccine. I think there's a large group of people that are willing to get it, but kind of want to just wait and see what happens to everybody else first. And then there are some people that just flat out don't want it. They're distrustful of it, and they don't want it. But to go back to your question about when can we go back to church, when can we travel, when can we do all those things we want to do, I think that vaccination is going to play a key role in this. And so we have to do everything we can to make sure that people that we know who need the vaccine are vaccinated in the appropriate categories. Right now, the process does seem a little bit cumbersome, but they're also trying to prioritize with what vaccine is available. And hopefully that will get more widespread. But the vaccine, I really think, is the hope to get us back to normal.
Thank you. You kind of anticipated my last question for you, and which is that you have this unique vantage point given your profession and your experience. And I know this year has brought significant challenges and setbacks, and hope, and the deflation of hope. And I just wonder, it's nice to see a doctor be human, and I appreciate that. And I wonder, what have you seen from where you sit that is giving you hope right now? Maybe you just said it, but I just posed the question.
I think that's, I honestly think, the vaccine is really the key. I think that it's social distancing, wearing a mask can help keep keep the numbers at bay some, but when we look at this on a large scale, it's going to take vaccinating everyone. And we've got to do a great job of getting that message out to people. And systematically, we also need to, I mean, my wife's parents live in Greensboro, and they had a really hard, I mean, this is a personal anecdote. They were having a very difficult time getting registered for their vaccine in Greensboro. So Anita finagled a way to get it here next weekend when Atrium's having their really large vaccination site. But, and I've heard that over and over. I mean, here in Mecklenburg County so far, we've actually been pretty fortunate, I think. But I know I've heard horror stories in other parts of the country of people not being able to get the vaccine. And then there's, you know, I know over the past couple of days or week, there's been this discussion about if you get one vaccine of one type, can you get the second vaccine of the second type, you know? And the reason for that, honestly, I think that's messages being kind of put out there to prepare people for, okay, if we run out of one type of vaccine, you could complete the vaccination schedule with the second type of vaccine. And we're kind of allowing that to happen. But that's, I'm sorry, that's getting a little too granular to your question. But no, I still go back to the vaccine. I think the vaccine is the hope we've been looking for. I really do.
We're running up on time. I could ask you questions all day. I just had one clarifying question come to me in a chat, and then I want to shift gears a little bit here. But in terms of appropriate behavior after the vaccine, so once you're vaccinated, and this is just a simple question. I don't know if it's simple, but once I'm vaccinated, is it possible for me to pass COVID on to somebody else? That's just a question that I got.
Okay, and that comes up a lot. And let me first say the vaccine is 95, or each of the vaccines are roughly that we have access to are about 95% effective. So there are 5% of like instances where someone may actually still get COVID after having had the vaccine, which no vaccine is 100% effective. So if you're kind of in that really small unlucky group that you didn't make antibodies, you could still come down with COVID and pass COVID on to someone else. But when we're looking at most people, right, if you're vaccinated, you're not going to pass it to anyone else. Okay. If you're vaccinated, the goal is that you have enough protection that you're not going to get infected. So if you're not infected, you can't pass it along if you're not infected.
Thank you.
No, absolutely.
I know that everybody on the call joins me in thanking you for your time and just your generosity in sharing what you know. And thank you so much for being a resource. Those of you on the call may also know that Dr. Leonard has been part of the group that has been advising the church about decisions about how to keep our community safe during this crazy time. And so thank you so much.
You're absolutely welcome, Anna.
Thank you. We're going to shift here. Don Schmidt and Ann Barnard, who are two physicians in our community, have also agreed to talk a little bit this morning about their experience as physicians during the COVID pandemic. And Gerald's going to cue that up now.
Good morning. My name is Ann Barnard. I'm an internist with Trine Medical Partners. This is my husband, Don Schmidt, who is an anesthesiologist. We are delighted to be with you this morning and share a little bit about what it's been like to practice medicine in a pandemic. Anna has provided us some structure with questions, and so without further ado, we will delve into those.
You provide medical care in two pretty different settings. Ann in a primary care setting and Don in a hospital setting. How would you describe your differing experiences of patient care during the pandemic?
For me, in primary care, the past 10 months have been a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. Our offices never closed, not for one day, and we're very busy. At the same time, we launched a virtual platform 7 days a week into evenings and weekends. Most days over the last 10 months, I have seen patients all day in the office and come home to then see some on the virtual platform in the evenings, and most Saturdays. Sundays are often spent cleaning up on the avalanche of trailing work and resetting for the onslaught of the week to come. Having said all this, despite the overtime work, it is more than balanced out by a profound sense of gratitude for a profession that is a calling to help and serve others during times of crisis such as this.
For me as an anesthesiologist, the basics of what we do in care for patients hasn't changed much. Our volumes have ebbed and flowed as the pandemic has come on and restrictions have been in effect. But for us, the biggest thing has been increased awareness of being masked. Anytime you're around patients, even frankly, anytime you're around other staff, and in every interaction, being sure that you take a few extra moments, extra time, be sure that you have appropriate protective equipment on whenever necessary. And we're doing this to stay safe, not just for ourselves, but for our families, for our coworkers, and who will have to pick up the slack if one of us gets sick and is out, and frankly for the other patients we take care of. So there's been more need for us as anesthesiologists to help out our critical care colleagues, the doctors working in the intensive care units, who have been dealing with, instead of the normal volume of patients, they often have 2.5, 3 times the number of critical care patients to take care of. When you're dealing with that volume of patients, it doesn't take much to suddenly become overwhelmed when someone gets sick. So they've been relying on us to help out with care of some of the critical care patients, and that's where and when those patients come to the ORs is when it's most acutely aware for us just how sick these previously healthy patients can get, and very quickly so. Having said that, the other thing is that because we're all masked all the time, we're all hands off, and patient visitors are now restricted, I found myself trying to spend an extra moment or two, extra bit of time with each patient, developing a little bit more of a rapport, and trying to set them a little more at ease with this otherwise uncertain and anxiety-provoking healthcare environment that they find themselves in.
And I can say in response to that, I can remember at the beginning of the pandemic, lying awake in bed at night when Don was on call, worrying about him getting exposed, getting sick, what that would mean for him and our family. And that has dissipated some since we've learned more about the virus, and I've had a lot more faith in our protective equipment and vaccines and some other things we'll talk about later. Second question. You have 2 teenage boys at home navigating the restructuring of school and social life and extracurriculars, and 2 physician parents juggling the demands of an evolving medical crisis. How has this experience shaped your family life? Has it helped you discover anything about what you value collectively?
It has, for us, it's really caused our boys they have needed to, they've had to become more accountable on their own, for their own schoolwork, for their attendance to Zoom classes, which I feel like they've done very well for the most part. And the other thing is, in talking to them about this, I'm confident that they are glad to have one another around the house, even with no one else, even when no one else is around there. Even if there are large portions of the day where they don't really see each other because they're both in separate rooms doing their Zoom classwork. As far as values, we certainly have realized that we value each other, our family, one another, our nuclear family, more than I think we realized. We especially also value our health. because we've seen friends, neighbors, our boys' teammates, and coworkers contract COVID and have to work through the individual and sometimes lingering manifestations of these infections.
I remember at the outset of the pandemic, I had a lot of worry and guilt about my inability to be present for our boys, not only to help them with Zoom and school and responsibilities and staying on task, but really for their emotional health. And to my surprise and my delight, they have really excelled. They have managed it, they have persevered, they have, for the most part, done everything required with minimal intervention from us, because we're not here. And that has been definitely a silver lining. I've been very proud of them. In terms of discoveries, I think that within the shelter of each other, we have discovered that we not only love each other, but we actually like being together. And that is no more true than for the two of them who, when I asked each of them separately, they cited each other as a silver lining for this. And they've really been the rock and the support and the humor for each other during this in our absence, for sure.
You both participated in vaccine trials this fall. Can you tell us why you did that and what the experience was like?
Indeed, we were both part of vaccine trials through Trine Medical Partners, my group. We did this because we believe in science and we wanted to be part of the solution. I was part of the Janssen trial, a little bit different than the other two vaccines. It's a one-shot vaccine. I received my shot in November, had absolutely no side effects. I was convinced I had placebo. Early in January, all healthcare providers were offered the opportunity to unblind, and I found out that I actually received the real thing in November, which was like Christmas morning all over again. Our experience, I think, was a really good one with Trine Medical and Javara, the company that managed the trial. We would do it again, and we're very proud to have participated. Don had a slightly different vaccine experience.
Sure. My motivation certainly was scientific, but after witnessing some of the tragic and just horrific patient cases that came across, came through our hospitals during as the virus has surged and the infections have gotten worse, there's no second thought about whether I would take a vaccine. So I knew, because I knew if I participated in a phase 3 trial, I could either get the vaccine or the placebo. If I got the vaccine, then I would certainly have a higher measure of protection for myself, for my family, against serious illness and quite potentially death. But also knew that even if I got the placebo, I would still be participating in science to further the progress of rolling this vaccine out to others to help stem the tide of this pandemic. As it turns out, I did get the placebo, and fortunately, Moderna elected to unblind participants and allow placebo recipients to get the real vaccine, which I, of course, elected to do at my earliest opportunity. And I got the first vaccine early in January, and my booster will come in the next few days.
It's easy for people to forget that their doctors are human too. That this pandemic has meant bearing witness to a lot of grief, that you might also feel the stress that runs through the general population too, and sometimes carry it on their behalf. How are you taking care of yourself during what has to be a taxing period in your professional career?
It's not a new thing, but our approach to it has had to be new. It's exercise, and we were fortunate to have enough space that we were able to convert the playroom over our garage into as much of a home gym as we were able to. We've managed to stay active that way. Evan and I have been participate in martial arts for about the last 3 years or so, and we were fortunate that our martial arts studio moved quickly to Zoom-based classes when the lockdown began. So we've been using our makeshift gym as our part-time Zoom dojo to continue our martial arts practice. So really, from exercise and all other aspects of our life, we've tried to grasp some measure of normalcy from our otherwise very abnormal set of circumstances, and try to stay interactive with one another and with family through Zoom visits and whatnot.
For me, I answered this question using 3 words that all begin with the letter F. The first is faith. Faith in God, faith in science. This will get better. The second was fitness, exercise, which has always been my go-to, my medication, and never has it been more true than now. I've actually found again a yoga practice that I had started years ago, and I have begun a daily walk when I return from work, more for getting outside, getting sunshine. Sometimes I'll bring one of my 3 boys along with me to talk and walk. And finally, fellowship, finding ways for this extrovert to connect with others. Zoom has certainly been one of those. We've stayed, I think, more connected with our grandparents and extended family than usual, actually. But also fire pits, back porches with heat lamps, things of this nature that have helped us keep connected. For me, I needed to nurture relationships other than that of just doctor-patient relationship.
What are some real ways that people can support the frontline workers in their lives as this pandemic stretches on?
First, I would say to pray for us and with us, to worship with us on Sundays, so that we can strengthen our faith community. And please, whatever you do, continue the wonderful worship, the preaching, the words, the music, which is a source of Sabbath and harbor for us every week. Thank healthcare workers you happen to see or know. Those words mean so much. I can't tell you the number of patients that have reached out to me, either at a visit or separate from a visit, to say, how you doing, how's your family, even to say I love you, and then I'm able to reciprocate. Those words have been so meaningful and sustaining during this time. Persevere in your contagion precautions. Take this seriously. Wear your mask, keep your distance, wash your hands, and then get your vaccine when able. If you're concerned about the vaccine risk for yourself, talk to your trusted physician and get some guidance on doing that.
Absolutely. My answer is basically a ditto of that. Words of encouragement are great and absolutely appreciated, but healthcare providers, frontline workers, whether you're on the healthcare front or the Amazon drivers, everybody wants to see this. They want to see an end to this madness. As physicians and scientists, however, we know that the way this is going to happen is through perseverance, and with masking, with hand washing, with social distancing, as well as a rapid and widespread deployment of the vaccines as they become available. And there's no magic wand that's going to wave this away. There's no spell that's going to cast this demon out. It has to be a collective effort. It has to come from everybody. So we keep minding our 3 W's and get vaccination as soon as it's available to you.
Final question. Where have you found hope or silver linings during this time?
We've all been, in many respects, forced inside and forced to spend more time with our families and our nuclear families, and that's been a blessing, frankly. In months prior to this, all starting, it was everybody had their evening things, and they went to practice this and this and this, and then we just barely saw each other. This has brought us back together, and as trite as it may seem, even in the face of canceled spring breaks and limited limited travel over the holidays and the summer, we have taken on some home projects, and it's not just, it's been, the opportunity has been a blessing for me to not only feel that sense of accomplishment as a balance to the sense of relief and joy of travel, but the ability to teach my boys essential skills: how to paint a wall, how to sand stuff, how to repair things, how to install a new plug, or what have you. It's been nice to be forced into that opportunity to teach them those things and share those opportunities with them that otherwise might not have occurred.
I agree wholeheartedly. Time together has been the silver lining. I would add that hope is in the form of a vaccine. Any of the vaccines. Get yours. Just do it. And from our family to yours, we wish you a happy, healthier, and safer new year. We will get through this together.